Hello and welcome for another episode of the Cover Vet Chat. Today, I'm afraid I've been at short notice called out to do a night shift. There's possibly a lot of our listeners and viewers are experiencing as well from time to time. But I have the right person to talk to, and there's no one less than the recently appointed Chief Veterinary Officer of Hills Pet Food, Professor Jolle Kirpensteijn. Hi, Jolle.
Hello, Wolfgang. How are you?
So where in the world is Jolle at the moment? I have to ask this because it's difficult to keep track of you.
Yeah, it's very difficult to pin me down. Currently, I'm in the beautiful city of Atlanta, Georgia, where me and my partner have a house.
So, Global Chief Veterinary Officer at Hills. It doesn't go further than that, as far as I understand.
It's the highest of the highest.
Yeah, that is. I mean, this is something I really would like to talk with you about sort of a little bit later. But first of all, I mean, I've followed your career sort of over the years because our paths have crossed from time to time, and it's just, as I said before, there's just no endings. And you also do jump sort of from one area to another area of expertise, and from one country to another country. And I mean, a lot of our listeners and viewers are young veterinary surgeons, and I think that, I mean, in that respect, you are really somebody who is a role model because it shows sort of all the things you can do. It's not just the clinical work. Mm.
There is no limit in what you can do.
So you qualified in 1988 in Utrecht. Yeah?
Oh, did you have to say that now, Wolfgang? That gives me such a big
I have to say it because it's a year before me. That makes me feel so super young.
So I try to avoid these timestamps normally because that means that I'm really old already. But no. Yes. So I graduated from vet school 88, but before that I also went to America as a student. So I think that my path started way before that, of course, with two amazing parents that were both very cultural. So I'm kind of a privileged white kid. That's how I describe myself. And I had two amazing parents that loved to introduce us to the arts and the sciences. And so I've had an interest in sciences from very young. But during my vet school, I had a professor that stimulated his students to go abroad. And so he told me that, when we were still studying, we had a time in between the last year of vet school and the previous year. So in Holland, it's 6.5 years. So at the 5th year mark, we had to wait because it was a lottery to get into the clinics. And that lottery was a little antiquated. So the wait was about 7-8 months. So you had 7-8 months of nothing to do. And so the professor said to me, you have to go abroad. If you want to learn more, you have to go abroad. And so he stimulated me to apply for scholarships. And then I applied for veterinary schools. I think I applied to 5 of them in that time. And 3 responded positively. And I chose the first one, which was the University of Georgia in Athens, Georgia, which is a small town in the boonies of Georgia, the US. And I came, of course, from Utrecht and Amsterdam. So I was, I thought, quite a worldly kid. And then suddenly you're stuck in the deep south, which was a culture shock, not only for the fact that I thought I was really well versed in English, but I could not understand anybody there. So they spoke Southern slang, which was very, very difficult to understand. But it was an amazing 7 months. And I always tell people when they ask me if you could do anything else or what would you advise me, I would say go abroad, go to somewhere else that is not where you have grown into, where you're comfortable at, but look at spaces that you're uncomfortable at and go to that space and do something with veterinary medicine, or do nothing with veterinary medicine, but do something with yourself outside of your comfort zone. And those 7 months were the greatest months that I've ever had. As a matter of fact, I didn't want to go back. I had to finish my vet school, so I had to go back, but I didn't want to go back. I have friends still from those times, and I loved it. Interestingly enough, in the US at that time, the studies were much more clinical. So in Utrecht, they were really good in teaching the basics and theory. And then you had like 1 year to go through all the clinics. In the US, they start with clinics already in the first year. So they have a little different system, but in the last 4 years of your vet school, they started with clinics immediately in the first year. So, and I jumped into the senior year. So all those seniors already had 3 years of clinics behind their belt. And I just came in there just as a complete theoretic person. So I had to shift and be agile and adapt myself. But I loved it. The clinics are amazing there. They allowed you to do a lot of things. People were so enthusiastic, very high level energy, but also high level, of teaching. And the good news was that the theory base of Utrecht was amazing. So I knew most of the questions that they asked me. It was just more difficult because the clinical skills were obviously a little less, but clinical skills you can learn. So during those 8 months, I learned a lot of stuff. And then I came back to the clinics in Utrecht, and I had this way advantage for anybody in that came into clinics. So it was easy for me to draw blood. I could do surgeries. I had done many spays already. So I had this really big advantage on any of the other students that were in my group in Utrecht. And so I got this really good theoretical education. I passed my boards because of that. So I did boards in the US during that time. And I passed my boards only because I had such an excellent theoretical education in Utrecht. And then, of course, I passed all the clinics that I did in Utrecht when I came back because I had this amazing clinical education in the US. So it was a really good combination for me. But it also showed me that I wanted to do more. I didn't want to stop after being a student or even after graduation. So I wanted to do an internship, and I wanted to do a residency and all sorts of other stuff. And I'm very enthusiastic about it. But at that time, it was really difficult to get into residencies and internships in the US. It still is difficult, but it was very, very tough. So I did a lot of extra work to, to be able to go back as an intern. And I was lucky enough to be accepted in the University of Georgia as a clinical intern, which was another amazing year. So I was in Holland for 1.5 years. And then I went back to the US for a couple of years to do my internship, my residency, and then an oncology fellowship. And
but the residency you did at Kansas State University,
yes.
then.
Yeah, so
and I mean,
normally when you have an internship, you go in a residency somewhere else. So I applied for Kansas State, got the surgery residency there. And then at Colorado State, I did my surgical oncology fellowship under Steve Withrow. So that was the only school at that time that really was focused on oncology. And that's the topic that I love the most. And so I really wanted to go there, did an interview there, and I was accepted and had another amazing year there with amazing teachers. So I think, so my mantra is always, you can learn from anybody, and you have to just distract as much information that you can get out of these people. And I've met some amazing leaders in my life that have made me stronger. So that's kind of the experiment of the experience that I had in the US. So that's why I always say, when you start thinking about doing something else, don't dive immediately into general practice. Take a year off, do some other stuff, get some life experience, and then go back. Your life is really long, so you can do a lot of other stuff in between.
It's so interesting because you see your background is sort of American or Dutch. So you see my educational background was German, and you see when I qualified, I traveled and I tried to get experience abroad. I went to Scandinavia, and then I went also to Central America to improve sort of also on my language skills. Going back then to Germany, that was not an advantage. They looked at my CV, and the comment came, so colorful. But that was not in a particularly sort of positive way. Whereas sort of when I went over to the UK, it was, oh yeah, right. So there's more to this person than just sort of veterinary medicine, but so it's somebody who has a little bit more of a horizon. So it was a completely sort of different attitude towards it. So yeah, interesting that you say that. That was sort of your university and your peers, or your the people who educated you actually encouraged you to go out to do different things.
Absolutely. And obviously you have people that don't understand, you know, when you stick out a little bit, they want to pat you down to be the same as everybody else. In the US, it's completely different. They really stimulate excellence there. In Europe at that time, it was more, if you're mediocre, you're good enough, and you don't really have to be excelling in a lot of things. It's also a mindset, Wolfgang. I came back and I did not have the mindset of, you know, I'm going to teach now what I learned. I was very humble and humbled that I could go to America and that a lot of other people couldn't. Try to help my, my fellow students as much as I could, and had quite a lot of good relationships with. In Utrecht at that time, there were a couple of professors that came from America or from abroad, and they really appreciate that different view. After Utrecht, of course, I went back to the US. And when I came into the US, what I thought as a student was amazing is that they were so happy to see me and to help me. You know, they were so benevolent towards foreign students at that time, which was great. But after I came back to Utrecht the second time, after I did all my internships and the residency and the fellowship, I met a lot more resistance in the beginning because they thought that, you know, okay, he wants to tell us, because, you know, I was specialized in oncology. I had passed my boards in America. I had extra oncology education. So I was of the idea that they would come to Utrecht and they would embrace the fact that they had an oncologist now suddenly, because they didn't have one, and that they would allow me to set up this whole oncology, sub division. But that didn't happen. I mean, as a matter of fact, people tried to keep on, because, you know, oncology was done by an ear, nose, and throat person, and by a chest person, and by a GI person. And people had really a tough time with letting that go and having a stranger come in, just taking away cases. And I also understand that, you know, it's you know, if you have done it for years and years in the same way, it's really difficult to break out of that mold and allow people to do something different. So it took a couple of years. And in those years, I just focused on my research because I wanted to have a PhD. So I did a PhD in oncology. And with doing that, I started getting credibility with the oncologists that were there at that time. And then they saw the use of having a multidisciplinary oncology service. So where surgeons and radiation oncologists and medical oncologists would be working together. And for instance, Dr. Eric Teske, who was my mentor in Utrecht, an amazing oncologist, he saw immediately that that was the way to go. So I think he was a great help in bridging that surgical medical oncology gap that was in Utrecht for a long time. And so I think it is, you know, even if you know more, you still need to be humble about what others know, and they can bring you other things that you can learn from again. So change will happen, but sometimes change goes fast and sometimes change goes very, very slow. But as long as you see change, it's okay.
Obviously, your area of interest has always been surgery. Was that something sort of you already had in your childhood that you like to do, sort of, I don't know, handicrafts, woodwork, or something like that? Or, I mean, I think you're also a painter. So there is certainly also, and I mean, I'm asking that because I mean I had the great pleasure following some of your lectures, and for example one at that Wet Fest that Noel Fitzpatrick is organizing, and I remember sort of how much emphasis you laid on sort of the delicate handling of tissue edges, for example, which I found, wow, this is really sort of interesting. And but has it always been sort of that you were sort of also manually sort of quite creative?
As a kid, it's interesting, an interesting question, because as a kid, I cannot remember that I was that creative. Like I said, my parents were very creative. So my mother is a professional harp player. My dad was a very good flute player. My grandmother was an opera singer, and I can go on and on and on. So that artistry was in the family. They tried music with me and I completely failed. I was horrible. So you have two parents that are perfect in music. You would think you put them together, all those genes, then you get the little prodigy child, Jolle Kirpensteijn. But that obviously didn't happen, because in music I completely failed. I like music, but I cannot make it. So they were a little bit disappointed in that with my brother and my sister, which none of them were really very good in music. But if you look at the next generation, suddenly we have two people in our family that are super wonderful musicians. My uncle was a painter in Indonesia. He was pretty famous, as a matter of fact. So when I was young, I liked drawing and painting, but that was never picked up by any teachers. So I did a little bit myself, and I find some drawings from that time, which were quite interesting. So I started doing it again in the late 90s. So that's when I picked up painting again. And I agree with you that most veterinarians are artists in a way. So there's a lot of veterinarians that do woodwork. There's a lot of veterinarians that paint. There's a lot of veterinarians that do other things that are that are part of the arts and culture. So when I started painting again, I really noticed I liked it. So for me, I'm a very extrovert person normally. So I like to be around people. I draw energy from people, and I'm very, very extrovert. But when I paint, I'm very introvert. So that is my time that I can be alone. And I'm kind of an abstract painter, so I take things that I see and then change them. But nobody can disturb me during that time, because that really disturbs my flow. We have a group, a veterinary group. It's called Art Vet Now on Facebook, which consists of veterinary artists, and it's amazing work what they do. So it's called Art Vet Now, so ARTVETNOW, and it's amazing what people do on that. A very good friend of mine, Gunther Swartz, who is a surgeon from Switzerland. He's retired now, I think, but he paints the most beautiful things, and there's more people there that do some amazing things. So I do think that veterinarians have an artsy streak in them. And I remember that when I was still an intern, that I had a friend that did a lot of woodworking with his hands. To answer your question about surgery, I always felt that I was not the best surgeon in the world when I was young, and also during my studies. But that is once again also something you can train. And at the end, obviously, I became a pretty good surgeon. But I also tried to find my niche. So I did orthopedics. I did all the surgeries that I needed to do, and I found out that I was better in soft tissue surgery than orthopedic surgery. So that's why I was driven to soft tissue surgery. And you're true. I mean, I feel that doing surgery is like painting. And especially oncology surgery, you never know what you get. And so you have to be adaptive, and you have to be very, very careful. And so it's working with your two hands, and in unison really with the body that you're dealing with. And there, humility is another factor that plays a role, because I always feel that when I deal with surgery and with patients and with clients, that who am I to cut their dog, So I always feel that I've never been really aggressive in like, oh, I'm the surgeon and I'll fix your dog. No, I really want to know what the owner wants to get out of the surgery. And then with oncology, sometimes it's a really tough discipline, of course, because often they don't survive. So you really need to have that humility to say, this is a really bad tumor. I'm going to do the best what I can, and then stretch also your capabilities. So one thing that I learned from Steve Withrow was that nothing is impossible, even with tumors. So often people give tumors a death sentence, and I understand that because it is a really bad disease. But you should not be, your brain should not be trained for this. Your brain should be trained for, let's look at the possibilities that we have, and maybe we can create possibilities. So even in surgery, we developed new techniques, and we went further than most people went as an oncologic surgeon, because you know the basis really well, and then you add and build on what you know. So I think that's once again artistry. So what some people do in surgery is just unbelievable, and I think they're artists in themselves, just with a different palette.
Mm. It's just in my case, I mean, as a humble sort of first opinion practitioner, I noticed that once I sort of progressed with my surgical skills, actually my DIY skills also improved, because say with orthopedic surgery, for example, I mean, you need to have a rough idea of statics, for example, what will hold, what will not hold, and I could translate that also to DIY. And the same thing sort of also with needlework. I mean, sort of for example, if some of my outdoor gear breaks also, then I take needle and suture and I stitch that up as well, and not with a needle holder, by the way.
Oh, but I
So
do, yeah. Yeah, so I don't touch anything with my fingers. I'm so used to needle holders. And in the last part of the career, the other thing that I think is really important, Wolfgang, um, to stay interested in what you do. So I have this mantra that every 5 years I change my goals of what I want to reach. And so I could have been a surgeon for a very, very long time, and I was, because every 5 years I just wanted to have a different technique or a different thing that I really was deep diving in. And the last couple of years of my surgery career, I was really going into minimal invasive surgery, which was at the brink at that time. So now there's a lot of people doing it. And once again, you learn from teachers, from some really great people. Dr. Rafael Nickel was my teacher, a very famous German surgeon in the north of Germany, and he taught me how to do minimal invasive surgery. And so he was a great mentor for me to start that practice. And then 20 years later, of course, now I'm talking about minimal invasive surgery as if I invented it, but that's not the case. You always have people before you that stimulate you, that empower you to do so. And I think for us, then our role is to empower other people to do the same thing. So I see now a lot of my residents and people that studied with me do things that I'm very, very proud of, because you put a little seed in their brain or in their minds, and then it grows to this wonderful tree at a certain point. And so it makes me really happy to see people being empowered, and then taking the skills that they have and expand those.
And I mean, you then went sort of from the States, you went back to Utrecht, and then so you went to Copenhagen. How did that came about?
Yeah, so I had 3 years. I was a professor in surgery in Copenhagen. A friend of mine was there, and she asked if I could help. So I had a part-time appointment in Copenhagen, 1 week a month for 3 years. A wonderful experience. First, the Nordic countries are amazing. Nordic people are amazing to work with. And Denmark is such a wonderful country to live in. So there were lots of great things. The university there was really up and coming, and so they have a very enthusiastic young team, and it was great to be a team leader there. So that's where I kind of learned to be a team leader. In Holland, I was part of a team already. There I had to lead the team, and so I got a lot of new information and new learnings out of that. And when you have a young enthusiastic team, you can do anything. We look at Ted Lasso right now, on English TV. That series is really built on empowered leadership, and so that is something that you can do with a team that's eager to learn. and you can bring them to really great heights. So it's a fantastic opportunity. I love my stay there, and that was for 3 years until they offered me a full position in surgery, full professor position in surgery in Utrecht. So then I had to say goodbye to my Copenhagen friends. But Copenhagen is a part of my heart since then, because they're an amazing group of people.
Well, I can't deny what you said about the Nordic countries. I mean, I'm at the moment talking to you from north of Sweden, so I'm working at the moment with a Swedish team, and it's a lot of fun. It's really good.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah. So, but then, as you said, sort of after 5 years, you refocus again. So then surgery, sort of, you changed completely, massive change, completely away from surgery, and then you went to Hills. And I mean, then we are talking probably more sort of animal nutrition. That was 2013. How did that come about?
Yeah, so the 5 year itch is a real thing for me, and it doesn't have to be 5 years. It can be 4 years or 6 years or whatever. But I always get itchy after a while, and then I'm looking at new opportunities. When you're a full professor in Utrecht and probably other schools too, you also realize that you have other responsibilities. So I couldn't be in surgery every day anymore. I had a lot of administrative functions that I had to do, and at that time, I had to make a choice if I wanted to be a crown appointed professor. It's a very difficult system in Utrecht, but a certain type of professor, which also meant that I probably should have become, for instance, department leader, or maybe at a certain point, associate dean or full dean or whatever, that trajectory, which means really business, academic business. And when I was thinking about that, I was like, one, I don't know anything about business. I know how to work with a team because I've done that now for 10 years, but I'm not really very good in business skills. And now they expect me to do this multi-million-dollar business venture. And I also know that in the academia, there's limited resources for you to learn from other people because you're so busy. Nothing against academia and nothing against real good business leaders within academia. And so I was like, okay, if I want to do something with business, and I had two corporations at that time. One was for my lectures, and another one was what was something else. And I was really intrigued by business administration and doing business. And Hills reached out to me through a good friend who was leaving the company, and she said, "Hey, I would like to ask you." And at first, my reaction was, "Of course not. I have nothing but nutrition. I know nutrition. I had the basis because nutrition oncology is quite important, but as a surgeon, that's not the first focus you have. They should have, but they don't." And so I was like, no. But then I started talking with her boss, which was the CEO at that time. I went to Kansas, and it really triggered my interest. So I need to get these triggers. And if they pull the right triggers, then I get interested. And I was like, this is, it's 5 years. I've done this for a long time. I've been surgeon for a long time now. There are things that I really like, but there's also things that I don't like. And I want to go back to your evening and night shift. That's the evening and night shifts were very, very tough, especially if you don't have a big team. So every week you had to do evening and night shifts. And in the university, it means that almost every time someone came in. So it was very, very taxing. And then the university doesn't have a very good system at that time to compensate you for those hours. So they just expect you as a full professor to be back in the morning and do as nothing was wrong with it. And when you're really young, everything is fine and you can do it. But I got a little older and I was like, this is too much taxing. On the other hand, the best surgeries that I've ever done in my life were always at night. You had not to deal with anybody else. You could do whatever you want. You could experiment. And I love that part.
You're a small team, so you're if you are in I think it's if you are in a ship, there's a certain camaraderie you have then with this team. You also get to know your team members a little bit closer, sort of, and especially sort of over the surgery table. I mean, you will have had that sort of. You have all sorts of conversation because people can't run away. They have to do the anesthesia or have to assist or so. And well, where you can listen to music or you can talk. and you can talk sometimes about very interesting things, I find.
It's very good to see how teams work under stress situations during
Yeah.
industry. So once again, you learn a lot from teamwork under stress, which is another thing that, of course, I took with me. But so when that friend reached out to me, I was like, okay, there's benefits, because I always do a benefit analysis. There's benefits and there are things against it, and make my little list and weigh them. And at a certain point, I was like, hey, the benefits of this, making this jump and learning how to do real business, because the guarantee that I got from going to Hills was, this is a global company, so you have to know something about business to be able to survive in that environment. And so I knew that they would give me the tools to become a better business leader. And so that was the intriguing part for me. I always wanted to go back to the US. That's another reason that I made that decision. Although it was very, very tough to leave my family, which was on the bucket that was not so good. So I always do that counterbalance argument, and then I make a decision. And new adventures are really enticing for me. The disc profile, where they look at your personality. I'm a big I, which I love innovation, I love changes, and so that is something that really works for me, and it keeps me very excited about the things that I'm doing. It was 180-degree, because no more surgery, completely uncomfortable situation in the beginning, but like I said, that was poured into me really, really young, and it challenges me too. And Hills is an amazing company to work for. The people are so dedicated for, our core belief that the pet is at the center of everything, and that the profession is super important in that relationship. And so I have met so many amazing people from all facets of the company: marketing, the sales team, legal. It doesn't matter. You often don't realize in those big companies how many people are working for those companies, and how much talent there is there, because they're really a talent-driven organization that stimulates people to do the right thing, one, and also if you're good at something, you will definitely climb up the social ladder.
So now you said before the end of the year you were appointed global chief veterinary officer. So in that position, what is your brief? What do you have to do? So that we have a rough idea. Also, I mean, as a European in a global company, are you the first European holder of this position, or? Because obviously we have to remember sort of that Hills Colgate is predominantly an American or initially American company, and
it started in America. It's Colgate obviously it has subsidiaries everywhere in the world, just as Hills does. But I started in Hills as the global relation officer, which was a really good choice for Hills to do, because I was just at the end of my WSAVA presidency. So I was the president of the World Small Animal Veterinary Association, and I had relationships all over the world. So to introduce a person, and I think businesses are really good at that, to find the person that they need for specific positions, and they needed a person that was good at international relationships. So that's how it came in, professional relationships. I did that for a while under Dr. Marina De Bernardi, who was the chief veterinary officer at that time. And then they moved me from that position to the US. So I was the chief veterinary officer in the US, while Marina was the chief veterinary officer in the world or global. And the US position was really focused on the US business, only the US. This position, of course, is after Marina decided to retire, and she has been an amazing leader for us, for Hills, but also for the profession, because she's a veterinarian. She's from Italy. She has a lot of experience in the professional world, but she also had a lot of experience in the Hills world and Colgate world, because she was there for more than 20 years. So she was a wealth of experience, and did a really great job. And so I'm really proud to be able to say that she was my mentor once again. I'm going back to that mentorship that you have with people that guide you in your path towards your end station, whatever end station it is. But she was an amazing mentor to me, so I'm very, very grateful for her. The global position is focused on the profession globally, and that's the US too. So it's the position that is an umbrella position. Obviously, I have a CEO above me, and I have lots of peers that are part of the exec group. That peers in sales and in marketing and in digital. There's a lot of people that I work with, because I think these companies show how good teams work together. And so it's not that, hey, it's Jolle that does everything. No, it's just the team does everything. And I'm just a part of that. But I'm an essential part, because the profession for Hills is really important. It's, it's the center of how we're doing business. And so and because the profession is so important, they will need a person that, one, understands the profession, and that's one of my tasks. So to explain the profession to people that are not as well known with the profession, and on the other hand, to be the face of Hills towards the profession. So the profession changes all the time too, and I think I've said that already for a couple of years. The profession is right now in a disruption phase. So things are happening right now. There's early signs of disruption going on. Corporates, for instance, is one of the disruptors that are happening right now. But e-commerce is another. And the veterinarians need to start adapting to that, because that ecosystem of veterinary medicine is going to change because of these disruptions that are happening. And I think that as Chief Veterinary Officer for Hills, I can help the profession with that too, to see those early warning signs, and also to explain to them why it's important to invest, for instance, in e-commerce solutions. Why is it important to invest in telehealth services? And I understand a lot of veterinarians are, I don't have time for that. It's a pandemic. I cannot even think about these things. But the world is changing, and what is more important, that your consumers are changing. And veterinary medicine is a consumer-centric profession. And if you lose the consumer, you lose your livelihood. So you need to see where the consumers are, and if the consumer wants telehealth, you better get telehealth in your system. Or if the consumer wants to buy in your clinic but also outside your clinic, you better be able to give that to the consumer, because if you don't, someone else will. And the changes are happening so fast right now in this new world that we live in, and digital has to do with it, that it is a very exciting time. But for people that don't like change, it's a very scary time too. So I know that my role in Global will be to help people navigate through these rough times too. So we're there not in only good times, but also in difficult times. And I think the difficult times are here right now, with people being very, very stressed and emotionally challenged because of the pandemic, and then all the changes that are on top of that. The pandemic has really put us in. So I always say that we were on the river, and we noticed that the river was going faster. And normally when a river goes faster, there's something that happens. And often that's like, a waterfall or something like that. But in the pandemic season, suddenly from faster, it goes with warp speed. So now, you're very close to the edge, and you better start doing something, because otherwise you will go off the edge. And so that's in the situation that we are in. The pandemic really increased the velocity of the changes. And so for me, I love the fact that I'm once again back in Global. I have a much more strategic job. In the US, very executional. Here's a strategic job, how we can help veterinarians be the best in what they do, because it's a profession, it's a very needed profession, but the profession will change. And so that's,
one change we also all experience now is also sort of when the question of sustainability and the carbon footprint of the work we are doing. And I mean, then sometimes the question arises sort of in how far is it justifiable to keep pets and to feed pets. I don't know, sort of with predominantly sort of meat-based diets also. How is Hill sort of addressing this issue or approaching this question?
Yeah, there's a couple of issues that Hills feels very, very strongly about. And one is, of course, sustainability, like everybody should. I mean, sustainability is not a problem that is just Hills. Sustainability is a problem that we all have. How do we deal with the energy that we use, the footprint that we have, et cetera, et cetera? And what do we do to change that? You know, it's very simple. For instance, if you change all your light bulbs with LED bulbs, I mean, you change history because you do your part that you need to do. If you look at bigger industries, we need to do something with this earth. We only have one earth. And if we mess it up, there's nothing that we can go to, at least not yet. We haven't found any other survivable planet. So let's take care of this planet. And everybody plays a role. And it's not only you and I, but also a company like Hill. So one of the things that I'm really enthusiastic about, that we just announced a partnership with with Bond, which uses cultured meat, for instance, as an alternative for. I'm not saying that we suddenly will only use cultured meat in all the products that we have, but we are trying to find out if there's alternatives to meat production. But you have to realize, if we do that, that will also hurt part of our profession too, that is now really important in meat production. So that group also needs to start thinking about how they can become more sustainable. And how do we deal with large congregations of animals in one spot? I'm from Holland. It's one of the biggest exporters of poultry, biggest exporter of pork meat. But putting all those animals in very small spaces also give risks. And, then you get those communicable diseases that suddenly pop up. And so there's a lot of work that we as veterinarians need to do. And we need to have a central role once again here, because the profession is educated to know about public health, to know about the animals that they treat. Because, I always say, I treat the animals and I'm humble about it because I try to make them better. So I'm very focused on therapeutic, but also preventative. So who am I that I'm allowed to treat animals? That it's an honor for me to do so. So I want the best for them too. And then next to that, I think once again, everybody has a personal relationship with being sustainable. If we don't do it as a whole community, it's not going to work. We can blame, we can blame countries, we can blame people, but really you only have to blame yourself for not making a difference. So if anybody listens to the podcast, I would say, okay, what are you going to do this year to make the earth more sustainable? And if we all do that, it will turn it around. I'm a complete optimist in these things. I think if people understand how dire the situation is, and hopefully they do, then we'll turn it around.
Another issue is you have been quite an outspoken advocate for LGBT rights, and you have highlighted issues. In how far has this been in your personal life, in your personal pathway, sort of over the years, been an issue? And also, how does Hills sort of help you or support you in this sort of context?
A very good question, and definitely a topic of my heart. It's not easy when you're different, and I'm not only talking about myself, because I said I was a privileged kid. I always say I was a privileged kid until I found out I was gay, because then suddenly a lot of privileges you lose. In the beginning, it was tough. I found out when I was in my 20s that I was gay, and I had a very supportive family. So I did not have any issues at home. Like I said, my parents, amazing parents that I had. They accepted it as is. But during my first parts of my studies, I was pretty quiet about it. I didn't want to have it influence my chances, etc. At least I thought that way. And probably the US was a little bit not as open to the the thought process as it is now. At a certain point, I made a decision for myself, though, that I wanted to live my life the way that I wanted to live. And since then, I've become a very, very strong voice for the LGBTQ community in the profession. But also, diversity, equity, and inclusion is a topic that we all should be talking about, because it's not only people that are that have different genders or different gender um, interests. It's people, it's women, and the gap that women have in society. It is people in the US. It is race, which is a really big point. In Europe, handicapped people that are struggling to be able to reach the things that people that don't have a handicap can reach. Indigenous people that have been suppressed for a long, long time. I think we need to look at a society where we celebrate these differences, and where we can use those differences to become stronger. I can tell you from research that if you have a diverse team, your team will be much better than if it's all the same people, because all the same people think the same. So then you can only do the same, and you will never change. So you need a diversity to be able to see that change. But diversity is not the only thing that we need. We need an inclusion. So, you can have a whole team that is diverse, but if you don't include them in the important discussions, it's not going to help. And then you have to have equity. They have to have the same chance. It's important that, I have always very strongly felt about, that women need to get the same chances as men have. And transgender people need to have the same chances. So for me, it is such an important topic, and we just started with it. We're in infancy. There's still so much that we can do and that we need to do, and we need to listen to people talk about it. And I learned a lot, because when I came to the US for the first time, I always say that I was in Amsterdam, and it's a very free country, Holland, and everything is allowed, etc. And then I went to Georgia, and I was in the deep south, and there was still segregation there. So there were areas where whites were only allowed to go, and it was a shocker for me. But that also made me dive into that topic and understand that African Americans have a long way. My way is really easy. You can't see that I'm gay from the outside. So I get all the opportunities, but if you're black, you don't get all the opportunities. And if you are handicapped, you don't get all the opportunities, because people will immediately put you in a little corner where they say, okay, this is how far you can go. And the Paralympics show that they can do things that nobody thought about, and they do things much better than I do. So who am I to tell them that they cannot do things? It is that, like what we started with, the options are endless, as long as you allow the environment and the peers to be able to empower people to reach their goals.
Something else you're very active in is professional social media, and also digital innovation. So I understand sort of you have, obviously you have this very successful per podcast together with Dr. Susan Little. And then there's also a global veterinary surgery podcast you're producing.
Yeah, so social media is one of my passions. Once again, I think a lot of people talk about the bad side of social media, but I think social media is a way that you can reach other people too that you normally didn't reach. So for me, it's once again a source of energy. Two podcasts that I have right now. The Per podcast is the one that we put most emphasis on. We found out during our lectures, Dr. Susan and I, that people ask the same questions. And the same questions were fueled by that a lot of people don't know where to find information about cats. So this is a podcast for veterinary professionals only about cats. We are not allowed to say the D word in that podcast. And we have a lot of people that are experts in cats talk with us. It's a fun podcast to listen to. It's only 20 minutes. And it's so much fun to make. The veterinary surgery podcast is a little bit more serious, and I have to say I haven't done one for a while. I need to get back to that. But it's located. It's associated with the Global Veterinary Surgery Facebook page, where we have more than 7,000 people talking about surgery topics. And that's something, of course, of my passion. One thing that I did this year was publish my basic surgery book free. So it is a flip book and a downloadable PDF of basic surgery techniques. And I wanted to do that because, if you are in Africa, you might not have money to buy books, or you might not be able to have books there, but everybody has mobile phones. So I wanted to make a mobile surgery book that everybody could read. And so I put a little money in the design, et cetera, et cetera. I had a wonderful editor that helped me with that. And this was a book that we used to use in Utrecht. So I asked the authors if they wanted to help, and they did. And so they all revamped the chapters. And now we have a free downloadable freeware. You can share as much as you want. You can use as much as you want. And it's all free to increase the knowledge in surgery. And I think that's the important part. I always stay a teacher in my heart. I've done teaching for so long that we need to find ways to elevate the level of knowledge everywhere in the world. And these are two little things that I do to do that. And I think it is important that people realize that these things are available. And you as VKV are doing the same thing. And WCVA is doing the same thing, that, you really want to help people become better veterinarians. And it's very much appreciated.
Certainly, and certainly social media and the internet has helped a lot. I mean, before then it was so difficult sometimes to get our journals sort of shipped to certain places of the world. Now, suddenly, if you have an internet access, you can get it. And that makes a huge case for some of our colleagues, absolute lifesaver.
And think about sustainability here too. So you don't have to print all those journals anymore that people will throw away. You can just get it online. I think the digital revolution is still happening. That's another disruptor that's happening right now. So you have to look what influence that will have on your practice and your life. But and let's go back then to the consumer. Where do you think the consumer is right now? The consumer is on social media. And so that's where they get most of the information. If you think that they get the information from a newspaper or from you lecturing somewhere, you're mistaken. They get it from their peers on social media. Yeah. So that's where you have to be.
3 quick final questions. When you take a break, when you settle down in the evening, can you introduce us to your favorite drink? Do you have anything you quite sort of like, or if somebody wants to give you a present, what sort of drink can they give you?
Yeah, so it's funny because I sometimes have those moments that I think that I am overweight, and then I don't drink for a while. So I don't want to promote drinking in general. I love tea in the afternoon or in the evening. I'm that must be the English part of me. I love hot tea. But if you would push me what then my favorite drink is, I would say probably a gin and tonic. And I always say that a gin and tonic is my favorite drink because it works against malaria. So wherever you are, if they bite you, you don't get malaria. So, but no,
yeah,
that's a joke.
With a lot of quinine, yeah.
Yes. And so but that's a joke. I think that would be my favorite drink. But right now, as a matter of fact, I'm in a period that I don't drink at all. It has to do with the fact that sometimes I like to unplug myself from social media, unplug myself from eating meat. I don't eat a lot of meat anyway, but or unplug myself from drinking, and then I have like a month or 2 months that I don't do anything. It's a nice way of refreshing yourself again.
Then one surgical instrument, or one instrument that you would say sort of that is completely underused, or something you would recommend to younger colleagues. Is there anything that sticks out?
Well, I think endoscopic surgery is, of course, the answer there. I think everybody should use it because it's minimal invasive.
Please give it a try.
Yeah. And minimal invasive spaying is definitely the way to go. And in chest surgeries, it has taken away most of the procedures that we do. So if you really want to do something different, and it is cool because it looks like you're playing a game, it's like if people love playing these VR games, minimally invasive surgery is the way you should go.
And finally, one person that you would say really sort of made a huge difference for you, or that inspired you, or who would you say?
Both to mention two persons. The first one is Dr. Freek Meutsteeg. He's the one that said that I had to go to America. So he was a professor in orthopedics at Utrecht University, an amazing person, and he really stimulated me to look outside of the box. And the other one is Steve Withrow, who really showed me that surgical oncology and oncology is a fantastic profession to have. He was a great mentor, and he's still a great mentor. He's taught so many people that I'm very proud to have been part of his life river, of his path.
Jolle, thank you so much for spending the time with me and giving us an insight in your life. I'm sure that our listeners sort of drew some inspiration out of that. If anybody would like to comment on this or any other episode of Fekava VetChat, please email us on vetchat@fekava.org or contact us via our social media outlets. Jolle, thank you so much again, and I hope that I see all of you back again for another episode of Fekava VetChat very soon. Bye-bye.